Well, welcome back to CG Bros. In this second part of our series on rigid bodies using the PDI plugin for Max and Maya, we're going to look at making our rigid body simulation a little bit more sophisticated. In the first video series, we created a path fracture, base fracture of our object here, and we created a cracker object, which is actually going to be a driving actuator for our simulation. And what we've got right now is where we left off, I should say, is basically a simulation that runs the cracker object from frame 0 to 30, which is 1 second, through our object. But basically, every object here is a rigid body, and it responds equally to the simulation. So gravity's acting on everything. It doesn't hold together well. It creates quite an interesting simulation, but not exactly what we're after here. So let me show you how to make this a little more sophisticated by creating what's called a fracture body. And this is going to be a basic fracture body. There's two kinds of fracture bodies, basic and advanced, and we're going to go ahead and start with basic. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a look at a play blast of this animation up to this point. There we go. See the cracker object kind of blown through, but everything pretty much just collapses on its own. Not much rigidity there. That's what we're going to go ahead and fix now. So to create a basic fracture body, let's open up the basic fracture body dialog. Okay, let's go ahead and select all of our objects. I am going to deselect my cracker shape, my cracker object here. And let's go ahead and hit the Create button. This loads our fragments that we've selected into the dialog. Let's go ahead and rename this Path Fracture. Okay, let's go ahead and check this Attach Nearest, because that'll allow us to actually take advantage of this clusterized percentage here. It allows the grouping and the kind of the glue factor to take a hold there. And that's this attached threshold of 0.05. That's fine. Let's hit Accept. Okay, and you can see this has created our first fracture body up here called Path Fracture. Let's go ahead and see how that has affected our simulation. Alright, here we go. Let's take a look. That's pretty cool. You can see the cracker object is actually having quite an effect. It's blowing through here on the path coming this way. It's hitting the objects and basically blowing, transferring the entire energy through all of the objects and just blowing this building fragment just into bits. It's quite a cool effect, and you can see actually some of the clusterized value, how that's actually taking effect here. You can see the pieces that are holding their cells together. Let's do that clusterized factor. Let's go ahead and make some adjustments. Okay, so the first change I might want to make to this would probably be on this hardness attribute here. But I'm kind of liking the brittleness, the way this is kind of just busting off the way. I like it. I'm not going to change that at all, but I will mess with this clusterized factor a little bit. I think it was a little too clumpy for what I'm trying to get to here. I'm basically trying to get to the point where I want this cracker object to do the fracturing as it goes through on a very localized basis. And so I'm going to go ahead and set this clusterized factor 100. I don't want that to have much influence, basically no influence at all. I am going to come to this propagation scheme here and set it from continuous, which basically transfers the energy on a continuous basis through, which gave us that wall blasting, which is very cool for an impact blast, but not what I'm going for. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to local. And so that's going to basically localize the transfer force along the cracker object to the object surrounding it. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what that looks like now. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look. You know, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And you see what I'm kind of going for here. It's actually got a much more localized force distribution. You know, any of these points of progress that we've gone through today would be great, you know, on their own. So it just really depends on what your type of effect you're going for. On this particular effect, I'm going to go ahead and punch this up a little bit. I don't think there's enough force being released here, so let's go ahead and do that now. Now the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to increase the size of this cracker object so it just delivers more force. It's just a larger object that's going to be colliding with the surfaces of my fracture geometry here. So what we need to do here is actually go into the PDI Create Body interface here, and what we want to do is actually uncheck auto and uncheck passive, and that basically does a disconnect between the PDI plugin and the transform nodes because it doesn't like it if you are hooked up to the PDI system and you're doing all sorts of rotations and scale. It just doesn't work. So let's go ahead and scale this up to from 1 to say 2.5, 2.5. Okay, that's pretty significant. So we should see a lot more force distributed and delivered here through the surface. So let's go ahead and select this back to passive. And go ahead and select auto again. Let's go ahead and run this simulation again. Okay, here we go. Oh yeah. So that's just basically, it really depends on what you're going for here. Any of these, like I said, be creative. You can set your hardness settings a little different. So set your cluster settings a little bit differently. Set your mass settings a little bit differently. Experiment around and see exactly what you could do here. PDI is a pretty powerful plugin. It's quick, it's easy, and it really gets you to where you're going fast. And that's what I really appreciate about it. There's other programs out there that can do the same thing, but PDI actually, delivers on its goods. So. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run one more sim here, changing one of the settings that I haven't changed since the beginning here. And it's this hardness setting. I'm going to go ahead and set it from 50 to 10. Let's go ahead and see what impact that has. My sense is it's going to reduce the brittleness, and so it's going to break more easily in a more, a freer manner rather than snapping off the way it did before. Let's go ahead and take a look and see. Okay, here we go. Let's play this. Yeah, pretty nice, very dynamic. You see how they're much more freer to break apart. A lot less energy is transferred in a snapping way. It's a much more delicate kind of a break. But that's actually very nice for some of the larger structures. If you're doing simulation of larger structures, this is how they fracture. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is adding a little bit more energy into it. We tried to get a little more energy into it by increasing the size of our cracker object, but I don't want to make that any larger because I don't want to really adjust the overall size of that object as it goes through. I don't want to make it any larger. I like the way the crack simulation is now. I just want to introduce some more energy into it as the pieces fracture. So that's where this initial velocity and this initial spin come in. Let's go ahead and add some initial velocity of say 3,500 and 3,500 in Z. Let's add some initial spin as well as initial velocity, and let's go ahead and set the X value to say 3,000. Let's do the Z at 3,000 as well. Okay, let's go ahead and see what effect that has. Okay, let's take a look. Oh yeah, there's a lot more kick in the simulation here. And you see the pieces flipping around. That's due to the rotation values that we added in, as well as some of that translation moving through.